There you go. Thank you, Carol, Lou, Blackwood, and other folks. I wonder if you would just turn around, meet people next to you, behind you, etc., that you may or may not know, act like you don't know them, and introduce yourself. Let me go ahead and get started a little bit with some first remarks, Rick. Okay, I want you to know, if you look, and some of you have.
We're starting!
Right now. Here you go. You got this. You see that in your seat next to you? Be sure to look at the other side. I do that because I want to let you know that really one of the rationales for us doing this, and has been, is because in the Presbyterian denomination, there's what's called Earth Care certification, and we've been doing that now for 7 or 8 years, I think it is, and it tells you there how is it that we come in. Also, that quote from E.O. Wilson is enough to motivate, I think, anybody to really consider the importance of what we have to do as far as earth care. And certainly it's the importance of faith communities to be involved in this. In addition, there's going to be over there where these two gentlemen are standing, there's some information if you want to pick up. One is about the ECO team that is here at First Press, and also the Lawrence Ecology Teams United Sustainability, LETUS, which is 9 different faith communities here in Lawrence, and we do the advocating that comes out of the green teams or environmental teams in the faith communities. Then, finally, there's going to be some of this information here because, you know, we're just going to blatantly, we're not even getting paid to make this advertisement, to join the Farmers Union. I'm a member. They took me. Do become a member. They have a nice newsletter, and they do some great stuff. You know, there's basically the Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union. They're different. And if you want to join the Farm Bureau, or you already belong, that's great. Well, then add the Farmers Union. But beware. Okay. All right. The two leaders, facilitators today. First, Nick. Okay, Nick, I'll butcher this up. Lewandowski.
You got it.
Is that, what is that? What's that word?
Polish.
Polish, okay. Polish is the executive director of the Kansas Farmers Union. He gave me a bio, which I'm going to briefly share with you. He previously served as the government relations director for Wisconsin's Farmer Union, and was director of external affairs for Rocky Mountains Farmer Union at different times, and government relations associate for Wisconsin's Farmer Union up till 2018, and a special projects coordinator for Kansas Farmers Union from 2011 to 2015. He resides on the farm his great-great-grandparents homesteaded when they came to America from Sweden in the late 1800s, north of Cortland, Kansas. I think most of you know where Cortland, Kansas is. It just opened up, I know, for, you can see prairie chickens there. I think they have some legs there at Cortland, Kansas. He serves on the North Central Kansas Healthcare Foundation Board, Republic County Historical Museum Board, and is a member of the Scandia Lions Club. Don didn't give me a bio. I don't know why he wanted to hide, but he's the president of the Farmers Union. You can do your own introduction when you get up here. He didn't have a PhD. I knew that. I found that out. So, but I hope you say a few words about your background, and you've led such a great job as leader of the Farmers Union. So I'm going to let them be, and I'm glad you all had a chance to continue to converse. And there's something going around to sign. Don't worry, we're not going to call you blindly and ask for money. Just sign your name so we kind of have an idea, but we'd like to follow up possibly with other things in earth care that you'd like to know about. Okay, thank you.
I might just, I like coming to your church. I sneak over here and worship with you every now and then, and that's always a pleasure. And so seeing you around a little bit, and I don't feel right giving bios. But anyhow, this will be the easiest presentation I ever did, because Nick has a wonderful farm bill PowerPoint put together. He knows more about it than I do, and all I have to do is sit in the background and heckle him, so this will be a fun day.
Don's gonna give color commentary, so, but I wonder if maybe Paul Johnson will too, and maybe Zach Pastora and others that have a little bit of knowledge about this as well. I'm gonna move this out of the way so folks can see things better. Do you think I need a microphone?
No.
Can you hear me all right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. Well, thank you, Thad. Thanks for having us. We appreciate that. What a wonderful crowd. Thank you all for being here and taking the time. And there's a lot here to unpack. But I want to start out by just saying we're going to hit some of the history. We're going to hit the importance of the Farm Bill and then some impacts as well. So buckle your seatbelts because it's a bumpy road. Little bit of history about our organization. So Kansas Farmers Union is part of the National Farmers Union, which is based in Washington, D.C. We were actually formed in Point, Texas, many years ago. Anybody ever been to Point? Don and I have. It's a little dot on the map, but started in 1902, so we're well into our second century of existence. And we're the second largest general farm organization in the U.S. As Thad mentioned, the Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization, and we're right behind them. We have roughly 250,000 members across the country. There are 22 organized divisions in 33 states, and that map shows you all of these darkened green states have a Farmers Union division in them. You'll notice Nevada and Arizona do not, and then a large section of the southeast of the United States, of course, does not either. But there's a lot of reason behind that. I won't get into that today, but you can see a lot of our strength, of course, is through the Great Plains and the Midwest. Now, Kansas Farmers Union, this is basically our mission and our vision, what we stand for. We work to protect and enhance the economic interest and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and rural communities. But I'll note that we are starting to see more and more activity in our organization happening in urban areas. Areas like Lawrence, areas like Kansas City, areas like Wichita. So we're excited about that. So there may come a point where we add the word urban to that as well. We believe that family ownership of farmland is the basis for the world's most viable system of food and fiber production. And maintaining this system will preserve our natural and human resources, as well as promote a strong rural economy and a vibrant social structure. This here is our old logo. Down here is our new kind of corporatized logo, as I call it. But this was our logo for many, many years. The triangle with the plow, rake, and hoe, tools that, of course, farmers have used for centuries. But around each side of this triangle, you'll see the words cooperation, legislation, and education. Those are the three main tenets of our organization. It's what we stand for. Cooperation, working together, compromise, building the cooperative business model, and encouraging that. Legislation, of course, which we're going to talk a lot about today in the Farm Bill, both on the federal level and then on the state level too, focusing on legislation. But I think probably the most important would be education, which is part of why we're here today, educating you all on what the Farm Bill is, what it stands for, what it means to all of you. And then also we have a strong history in educating our youth about civics, about agriculture, about rural life, and all of those wonderful things, and about our organization. So today we're going to get into a lot of P words, as you can see. We're going to start with the past of the Farm Bill. We're going to talk about the parts of the Farm Bill. We're going to talk about some of the players involved in the Farm Bill. We're going to talk about price, process, progress, politics, priorities, and possibilities. And we may come up with another couple P words while we're on this track. But as I said, there's a lot to unpack. Did you know that there have been 18 farm bills since 1933? 18 farm bills in 91 years. I think that's a pretty impressive feat. And as you'll notice, many of them have about a 5-year or 6-year gap. There's a 10-year gap in there, there's a 1-year gap in there. But for the most part, we do a farm bill every 4 to 6 years on average. And when one ends, the work on the next one starts right back up. So really, the work on the farm bill never really stops happening.
That makes me feel old.
Yeah,
Because this is my 5th farm bill.
yeah, this is my third. This is my third farm
But
bill.
that only means you're 25, if it's every 5 years, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So let's get into the past. So the very first farm bill happened in 1933. Well, what was happening in the 30s? The Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Yeah. I'm reminded of my late grandmother who grew up in northwest Kansas in Decatur County. And growing up out there during the Dust Bowl of the dirty 30s, they didn't grow a crop on their farm for 7 years. They survived, they made it work, but they didn't grow anything for 7 years. The only thing that grew was prickly pear cactus. That was it. And they had the grasshoppers and all that. But all of those horrible things combined, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, all of those things brought folks together. There was literally dust blowing from Kansas and Oklahoma to Washington, D.C., and the white marble buildings were covered in brown and red dirt. And they realized we need to keep that dirt where it belongs. So we started to see those programs develop, and of course financial aid to U.S. farmers was a big part of that. They paid farmers to stop production of those 7 staple crops, or what we call commodities. The idea was that if you decrease supply, crop prices would increase. They even paid farmers to, unfortunately, kill livestock. Because if you couldn't grow a crop to feed your livestock, well then what good was that animal? So there were some farmers that were paid to kill their livestock, and then they had to dig a ditch and bury it. Well then eventually they paid those farmers to butcher that livestock and feed hungry people, which of course made a lot more sense. It also helped with conservation by preventing the unnecessary tilling of soil and water usage, and reducing the strain on an already taxed environment. So when we think about some of the conservation programs that are out there right now, such as building terraces and waterways and putting in windbreaks and those kinds of things, that's where this all came from. Moving forward into the 1960s, as you can see, the Farm Bill changed and it morphed with the ideas and the difficulties of the times. Financial aid for farmers moved towards social awareness and food assistance for low-income families. We'll get into this a little more. 73, 50 years ago now, 51 years ago, that's when the Farm Bill became omnibus, meaning it was comprised of several different items. It wasn't just farm programs. Not only did it include that support for farmers, it also authorized the food stamp program, what we know now today as SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. With that important step, the Farm Bill stopped being just about farmers. Moving forward into the 80s, it continued to evolve. Environmental disasters, such as oil spills and concerns over water and air pollution, turned our focus to protecting Earth, and that led to even more conservation programs added to the Farm Bill. The 90s, organic farming provisions and research funding became a part of the Farm Bill, and then the turn of the century saw even further expansion to focus on the food that we eat, horticulture and specialty crops, and promoting local food systems, something that a lot of us know and care a lot about. Then we moved into the 2000s. The new millennium, the rise of technology, brought the addition of bioenergy programs, which included refining corn kernel starch and other renewable sources into fuel. Don, you want to make a comment on that? I know you mentioned it.
A unique thing that happened in our policy drafting this year at convention was, at that time, we had support for corn ethanol as a renewable energy in our policy. And we took the word corn ethanol out of the renewable energy portion of it. And I think that was appropriately so.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanna do corn ethanol to eat from dumping our excess commodities on other world's farmers and countries and breaking their market, I can understand that, but don't say you're doing it to fix our climate.
And nobody really balked about it either. It just happened, so. We'll see what happens on the national level when they find that out, but anyway. So into the 2000s, the Farm Bill continued to provide food assistance to a growing number of folks across the country, including families with children, the elderly and the disabled. And truthfully, those are the majority of folks who utilize SNAP programs. It's the elderly, it's children, and working families, and the disabled. The Farm Bill became a far cry from its starting point generations ago. Then we get into the 2008, 2014 Farm Bills, and a lot of the focus on those particular Farm Bills was on that food assistance. Republicans, primarily in the House, wanted to make major cuts to the SNAP program. That led to major battles, and then of course the initial defeat of the Farm Bill in the House. In the end, though, compromises were made. They wanted to cut $40 billion out of SNAP. That's what they wanted. And by the time they got down to it, it ended up being cut by $8 billion. So cuts had to be made. That's just part of the process. But luckily it wasn't as severe as what it could have been. So then 2018 and beyond, as I said, typically it's every 4 to 5 years we draft another Farm Bill. It's evolved over time. And that's something that I think is important to note as well, that Farm Bills are not revolutionary. They are evolutionary. And while we would like them to be revolutionary, while we'd like to see more focus on whatever particular title we care about or titles, most of the time they just evolve. It's tweaking and those kinds of things over time. Large bills are generally difficult to pass through Congress, even in the best of times. Seems the worst outweighs the best anymore. But this Farm Bill is no different. It takes great financial resources, I'll talk a little more about that, and compromise, and many provisions are fighting for that money. So let's get into some of the Farm Bill myths and facts. The Farm Bill serves only farmers. That's a myth. The Farm Bill truly affects everyone. Aside from those farmers providing food and fiber and fuel, conservation programs protect natural resources, and nutrition assistance programs helps keep 43 million people at any given time fed. American farms are all large corporate farms. That is a myth. 97% of farms are family-owned operations. Now, they might be an LLC, which is a corporation, but that's for tax reasons. And those farms generate less than $350,000 gross annual income. Another myth, crop insurance is only available for large corn, soybean, wheat, and cotton farmers. That's not the case. There is a program called Whole Farm Revenue Protection for specialty crop growers. Now the problem with it is it's not affordable and it's not easily accessible, and that's something that we need to tackle in this Farm Bill to make it more affordable, to make it more accessible to those folks who are growing the food that you and I eat. Another myth, funding cuts to the Farm Bill affect commodity subsidies alone. As I mentioned earlier, that is a myth. In 2014, $8 billion of the nutrition assistance program was cut. Another myth, crop insurance encourages farmers to produce more crops on more land, harming the environment in the process. I think it's all about how you look at it. Certainly some of the bigger farmers abuse this. They absolutely do. But smaller farmers are truly focused on conservation compliance and sod saver, which helps to protect native habitats. The number of U.S. production acres has decreased, as has erosion. And then finally, crop subsidies and crop insurance allow farmers to get paid without doing the work. Well, that used to be the case, but not anymore. Crops can be lost due to weather, natural disasters, and unexpected pests. Crop insurance and crop subsidies provide a backup. It never makes you whole, but it certainly will help you pay for some of the inputs that you have, like your seed and fertilizer, chemical costs, those kinds of things. So let's get a little bit into the history of SNAP. So the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be called food stamps, 1939 was the first time someone used a food stamp to make a food purchase. That's Mabel McFiggin. She looks pretty happy with whatever she bought. I don't know what she got that day. Then we move forward into 1961. President Kennedy signed the first executive order that initiated the food stamp pilot program. In '64, then President Johnson made the food stamp program permanent by signing the Food Stamp Act. Then 74, 50 years ago now, the food stamp program went to all 50 states and territories. And in 77, President Carter signed the Food Stamp Act, establishing national standards of eligibility and eliminating the purchase requirements. So, why is SNAP in the Farm Bill? Because of these two. And I think we know who they are. George McGovern on the left was a Democrat from South Dakota. Bob Dole, of course, Republican from here in the great state of Kansas. Two farm state senators who were serving in the U.S. Senate at a time when farm production was high. We had a glut of commodities on the market. Prices were low. There were hungry people in the U.S. There were hungry people all over the world, and they said, let's combine the two. Let's figure this out and try to address both problems. So at a press conference after they had pitched this idea, a reporter asked Senator Dole, why would you put food stamps in the Farm Bill? And he answered, food and agriculture, do they have something in common with each other? That good old Dole dry wit, you know, that we knew him to have. But it's the truth. It's the truth. He just stated the facts. Now, many of you probably recognize this gentleman, Barry Flinchbaugh, the late ag policy professor at K-State. His comment in 2016, if you take SNAP out of the Farm Bill, that's the last farm bill ever. That's the truth. And I'll get into a lot of that here in a little bit. 80 to 85% of the funding for the Farm Bill goes to those food programs. If you take those programs out, it leaves USDA as a shell of its former self. There'd be no need for USDA on the cabinet level if you take SNAP out. Everything else could literally be farmed out to other agencies, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. And finally, urban members of Congress don't have any reason to support crop insurance without a nutrition program. But another reality is there are just as many rural folks who are utilizing these SNAP programs as there are urban. And I'll tell you how I know that. It's because of what happened during the pandemic. During that horrible, horrible time, when we were dealing with COVID-19 and all that came with that, we figured out pretty quickly how food insecure so many people in this country are, especially people in rural areas. At the time, I was living in Madison, Wisconsin, and I happened to be in a little bitty town called Mazomanie, Wisconsin, not too far from Madison. And it was a Saturday morning, just drove into town, just needed something to do. And as I came into town, I noticed there was a sandwich board out in the middle of the street that said, food bank, line up here. Well, of course, it was a drive-through line, and the line was 3 blocks long in a little bitty rural community, just probably 20 miles from Madison, Wisconsin. So that was very telling for me. And there were a lot of minivans, but there were also a lot of pickup trucks with Trump stickers on them, sitting in that line. So that tells you a lot right there. So here's a very outdated map of the congressional districts of this country. Of course, we all know there are 435 of them, but when you think about it, only about 38 of them are considered rural. And they're those great big ones like these here, and this one here, the big first that we're all in right now. So the voice of these rural, quote unquote, districts are getting smaller and smaller every time we do reapportionment, which of course is after every census every 10 years. So what would happen if they took SNAP out of the Farm Bill? Well, you could take nutrition and you could move it over to Health and Human Services. You could take those energy programs that I'll talk about and move those to Department of Energy. Research and Extension is funded by the Farm Bill. That could go to education, and then the Forestry Service could go to the Interior Department. By the time you do that, it puts USDA down to about 15% of its original budget, which of course would mean you wouldn't need to have a cabinet position. And I'll just say this, those who want this know exactly what they're doing. There's one particular political party in this country that calls for this. So it's basically calling for the end of USDA as we know it. And if they ever got that way, it would be extremely devastating. Because this department covers every inch of this country. So let's get into the Farm Bill titles. There are 12 of them. Commodities is number 1. Number 2 is conservation. Number 3 is trade. 4 is nutrition. 5 is credit. 6 is rural development. 7 is research. 8 is forestry. 9, energy. 10 is horticulture. 11 is crop insurance. And 12 is the big old catch-all miscellaneous. And this has evolved over time. You know, it hasn't always been this many titles, as I said. You know, it hasn't always been an omnibus piece of legislation. So let's dig into a little bit on what each title means. Title 1 is that commodity program, so it's a lot of the crops that are grown here in the state of Kansas. You're talking wheat, you're talking soybeans, you're talking corn, sorghum, those kinds of things. But it also provides protection against the fall in milk prices. So when I was working in Wisconsin, a lot of dairy farmers up there, not as many as there used to be, but it had a program in place for them. But also disaster relief for livestock. So when we've seen these horrible droughts happening across the country, especially here in Kansas, there's programs there, but there's also programs for tree fruit producers, which we see a lot in this part of the state, and then import barriers on sugar. Title 2, conservation, something that I think is very near and dear to a lot of us in the room. Those programs reward responsible stewardship and improved land management techniques. Title 3 is trade. It supports ag exports with programs like the Market Access Program, but also provides for international food assistance. So part of the work that Dole and McGovern did is in this title. Title 4, nutrition. I know we've talked a lot about this already. We're going to talk about it some more. That SNAP program, but also TFAP, that's the Emergency Food Assistance Program, helps 43 million Americans at any given time. And I've read this in the past. It's usually folks are on this program, either SNAP or TFAP, for really no more than about 6 months. That's about the average, really. I mean, I think a lot of people believe that people are on it and they stay on it, and then the next generation's on it, and on and on and on. Most of the time, it's on average about 6 months. It also helps provide funding to get USDA food into schools. Then Title 5 is credit, so farmers all across the country can get access to credit programs, loans, those kinds of things through FSA and through commercial lenders. Title 6 is rural development. You don't have to be a farmer to live away from cities. Rural development helps with things like internet and telecommunication access. Something that I know has helped a lot of rural communities and is currently helping a lot of rural communities getting access to broadband. Then we get into Title 7. I mentioned research and extension earlier and those related matters. A lot of funding goes to those. They're researching different crops and different cropping and that kind of thing. You get into Title 8, forestry, the USDA Forest Service, management of our natural forest resources. Title 9, energy, another one that I think folks in this room probably care a lot about, especially renewable energy. We get into biofuels and research and demonstrations, but it also gets into programs that allow for solar and wind and different things like that. Then we get into horticulture. So this is the food that you and I eat, those specialty crops that are grown, and many of those, of course, are grown in this part of the state, fruits and nuts and vegetables and flowers and all that. A lot of good programs there. Crop insurance, that's a big one. It helps to fund a lot of the work that we do at Farmers Union. We have an insurance division to our organization that helps farmers to cover some of those costs when they need it. And as I said, it helps to cover some of the work that we do. And then finally, that Title 12 miscellaneous. That's programs for livestock and poultry producers. Others not covered in the previous titles, but it also especially aims to help those limited resource and socially disadvantaged farmers who haven't been covered by some of these USDA programs in the past. As former President Obama said in 2014, it's like a Swiss Army knife. I just love that image. And it is so true because it has so much packed into that itty bitty case right there. one of the big things when it comes to a farm bill every 5, 6 years, or however often we do these, is coalition building. Working with folks like Zach, working with folks like Paul, but then also working with groups that you might not think a farm organization would be working with. So like some of the conservation groups like Pheasants Forever or Ducks Unlimited and all that. I think it's important for folks to understand that we develop those relationships, we foster those relationships because it's important, because those conservation programs are important to them because it's wildlife habitat, takes care of those things that they care a lot about, and those hunters are also voters, and they have money, and they spend that money accordingly. So it's important for us to maintain those relationships. So we've joined the Farm Bill for America's Families. It's a coalition on the national level pushing for the Farm Bill. As I've said before, you know, it impacts all Americans. You know, we've talked a lot about food security. Right behind this block is a number, and I'm trying to remember what it is. I think it is the number of farms in the U.S. Anybody have a guess as to how many farms are in the U.S.? Thad, you got an idea? Zach? Paul?
2 million.
You got it.
I knew he'd get it.
You got it. I don't have a prize for you. Well, I do have a prize. Conservation. This is so important. This is one of the, probably I would say, behind nutrition, probably one of the most important titles when it comes to the Farm Bill. Just because, you know, farmers want to pass on what they have to the next generation, and in order to do that, they want to take care of it. And they want to make sure that whatever they're doing to that land isn't affecting somebody downstream. For the most part, that's what farmers are doing. So how many acres would you believe are under conservation programs in the U.S. right now? Any guess? Do you have an idea?
Maybe 10?
10 million? Let's see.
Oh, geez.
140 million acres. 140 million acres, which is wonderful, but it's not enough. We need more. So risk management, as I said earlier, crop insurance is a big part of this. It matters to a lot of folks. How many acres are covered by crop insurance? Any guess? Dan? Jerry? 454.3 are covered by crop insurance.
You know, and I might just add that it kinda has a dirty name a lot of times, and it does get abused, but 2011, 2012, it worked perfectly. And that was an insurance program that was basically, didn't come out of the taxpayers' dollars except for the premium subsidies they do. So all that emergency was private insurance system. And so it worked, it kept farmers on the farm, and 2 days ago we hosted a tour up in Leavenworth County, and the farmer just said, if I didn't have crop insurance, 2011 would have took me out.
Yeah.
And so it does have a purpose, and it's helped me many times on my farm.
Can you
Of course, I
break
got
that down
credit.
between specialty crops and commodity crops?
I'm sure we can. I just don't know what I don't know what that breakdown would be.
90-10?
Is it 90-10? Okay. So there you go. 10% of those acres would be in specialty crops. That again brings up the point of we gotta get whole farm revenue protection more affordable and more accessible for those folks that are growing the food that you and I eat. Cause you know we're not eating field corn. We are consuming wheat. You know,
White wheat,
white wheat, yeah.
or white bread, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, and we're not eating a lot of soybeans, those are going into livestock feed, or into biodiesel, so. And then, again, addressing hunger, I think this is the number of folks, we've talked about it, I think earlier it was 43, it's down to 41.1, but it hovers right around there at any given time. So now we're gonna talk about the players in the Farm Bill. And you may not recognize any of these folks here, but they do, I see, have their names in front of them. These are the leaders of the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. Over here on the top left is Debbie Stabenow. She's the chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee from Michigan. Below her here is Senator John Bozeman of Arkansas. He's the ranking member on the Senate Ag Committee. Over here on the right is Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania. He chairs the House Ag Committee. And then below him is Representative David Scott of Georgia, the ranking member of the House Ag Committee. And I think it's important to note where they're from.
Yeah.
Michigan, Pennsylvania, upper Midwest, Northeast, and then Bozeman and Scott, Arkansas, Georgia, the South, Southeast. So having that understanding is important because what's grown in Michigan and produced in Pennsylvania, a lot of specialty crops. What's grown in Arkansas and Georgia? Cattle, rice, peanuts, cotton.
I was just gonna make the comment that our one hope of getting a farm bill done now is Senator Stabenow, because she's not running for reelection. One of her priorities is she wants a completed farm bill. And that's about the only thing that might make it happen before the election.
That's exactly right, Don, because a year from today, she's gonna be cleaning out her office.
And if we don't get a farm bill done before the election, the dynamics of the structure we're in could change dramatically.
Yeah.
It might be a lot worse,
Yeah,
maybe it'd be a lot better, but I think for the stability of the system, it would behoove us to get it done before the election.
exactly, yeah. This is not her first rodeo. She has been in this position multiple times. She's been the ranking member on the Senate Ag Committee multiple times. Worked very closely with former Senator Pat Roberts on the Farm Bill, so she knows what she's doing. The other gentleman, David Scott has been around for a while. Bozeman has been on the committee for a while. Thompson's fairly new in his position, but she's the one that's really got the backing. She's the one that's got the knowledge and the background. These are just some quotes from both chairs. This was from last December. I'll prioritize the needs of our producers in rural communities, and on and on and on. This, of course, was when they thought there might be a chance that they'd get it passed before the September 30 deadline. Chairwoman Stabenow says, we have a farm bill that needs to get passed next year that supports our farmers in food and nutrition programs and conservation programs across Michigan, of course, across the country. It's always been bipartisan. I think that has to be stressed. It's always been bipartisan. And as she said then, it's my intent as the chair of the committee to do everything possible to make that a bipartisan initiative. That was in November of 2022, she said that. So here's a good map showing you the makeup of the House Agriculture Committee. These are all congressional districts across the country. So as you can see, it's spread out fairly well. We've got folks out west, the Southwest, got a pretty good contingency through the Great Plains and Midwest, and then even down into the South and up into the Northeast. And of course, here we are, that lovely gerrymandered big first district. And then, of course, the great Sharice Davids is on the Ag Committee now. So we have 2 from our 6 members of the delegation on the committee, which is great. It's wonderful. And we work closely with both of these folks and their staff, primarily their staff. But, Don ran into Sharice the other day on that tour. She was part of that. She's been a wonderful addition to the House Ag Committee. She came in and flat out told us, she says, I don't know a lot about agriculture, but I want to learn. Because as you know, her district changed. You know all too well her district changed. It became very rural very fast. She had to learn. And she has done a wonderful job, and she's surrounded herself with some wonderful staff as well. So we've got them. And then we move over to the Senate Ag Committee. As you can see there, it's a little more concentrated. This is as far west as the representation goes on the Senate Ag Committee. Colorado and New Mexico. When I worked for Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, we only had one of those 3 states because they had Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. Since then, they've picked up Senator Ben Ray Lujan in New Mexico. But as you can see, you know, the Great Plains states, upper Midwest, Northeast, but then also again, that deep South, Southeast influence. And some of these states have both of their senators. Minnesota and Iowa have both U.S. senators on the Ag Committee, which is kind of nice for them. We have the one, Senator Marshall. And I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, we won't get any further than that, but I think it's important to note that this is the first time in about 30 years that we've had this much influence in the Farm Bill. Because it was 1993 when Representative Pat Roberts, and then Senator Pat Dole, and then Representative Dan Glickman served on those respective committees. We haven't had that many people at one given time, especially during a Farm Bill, for 30 years. There was also a time, not too long ago, when we didn't have anybody on the House Agriculture Committee. When Tim Hulskamp threw his little hissy fit, and John Boehner kicked him off the Ag Committee. So there was a time we only had one person representing Kansas on an Agriculture Committee, and that was Pat Roberts.
Wasn't he, chair of the Senate Ag Committee in the early 2000s?
Who?
Roberts.
Oh yeah, but I'm noting that he was a representative then, in '93. Yeah, but yes, he was chair of the
He
Senate
wrote
Ag
the
Committee.
2008 Farm Bill.
He did, yeah, so. So let's get into price. Projected Farm Bill spending for 2023 to 2032, $1.3 trillion. A lot of money. A lot of money. And as you can see, nutrition covers the lion's share. Then we get into crop insurance 6%, commodities 5%, conservation 4%, and then that everything else, that miscellaneous and then some, covers that 1%. So it's huge. This is just a Farm Bill calendar that kind of shows over time, starting in '65 up to 2018. You know, when the Farm Bill is introduced and the committees, and then when it ends up getting enacted. You know, like in 2018, it was introduced back in April and then wrapped up, you know, right before the start of the new year. We haven't passed a Farm Bill on time since 2008, and I'll talk a little more about that. So let's talk about the process. So the very first part of the process is committee hearings. That's when the Senate Ag Committee and the House Ag Committee hold hearings, and they go through all of the programs within the Farm Bill. And they bring people in, they have folks from all across the country come in. These are Farmers Union members who've been asked to come and testify and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, what needs fixed, what needs tweaked, what needs to go, all those things. So that's where it all starts. And then they do field hearings. That's when they go out into the field, so to speak. They go back home into their districts. The chairwoman will go home to Michigan, and she'll take the ranking member and maybe some other members of the Senate Ag Committee with her, and they'll hold a hearing. This happens to be the Minnesota Farm Fest, their big farm gathering that they have every summer. And people can come. You can go as a representative of your organization. You can go as an individual if you'd like. Pat Roberts hosted one many years ago in Wichita, I remember. I think that was 2012. So those kinds of things. This.
Okay, that was just what I was gonna
Yeah.
tell you to tell them about.
Yeah. So instead of a field hearing, Sharice Davids has done a lot of farm visits and roundtables, and we actually were honored to host her at Rosanna Bauman's farm. Anybody know Rosanna? Yeah, she's great. She's on our board. So we had a meeting in the feed mill with Sharice Davids after we did a tour with her. And there she is right there, and we had a wonderful discussion, and there was folks from the Farm Bureau there and other organizations to take that in and have a good conversation. Here's another one. There was a roundtable in Manhattan last year. Marshall and Bozeman were in town for that. And then last summer, went down to Gypsum, Kansas, south of Salina for Tracy Mann, and he had the chairman, Glenn Thompson, do a Farm Bill, listening session there as well. Then it moves into the process of markup. And that's where the committees each take the Farm Bill, the previous Farm Bill, the one that we're currently under right now, and they go line by line, page by page with a red pen, and they literally mark it up. I've been in DC when this is happening, and it's a really interesting process to watch. It's very lengthy. This happens to be a picture of the Senate Ag Committee. Pat Roberts here when he was chairman, Debbie Stabenow to his right, all the members of the committee around the table, and then these are the staffers. These are the folks who are running the country. These are the folks that are actually doing the lion's share of the work. But they do, they literally go through it page by page, line by line, and mark it up. Then it moves to the floor, where they debate and vote on it. Here's the House floor, here's Senator Stabenow, and then Representative Blumenauer on the House side, talking it up. After each individual House and Senate passes their version of the Farm Bill, they form a conference committee. And that means they bring members of the Senate Ag Committee, members of the House Ag Committee together in one big room like this right here, and right there is the Farm Bill. And they go through it, and then they find compromise, hopefully, if it all works. But here's some pictures then. After all that happens, they vote on it, it passes, it moves into the final part of the process, and that is the signing. And usually that's pretty uneventful. I think Obama signed it in front of a combine, and most of the time they just pull a table out at the White House auditorium and sign it and keep moving on. So that's the process. But let's get into some of the politics. Do we have any football fans in the crowd? You should. I mean, you've had a pretty good season here. Chiefs, KU, you know. So the guy on the right here, Kevin McCarthy, got punted. And we have a new speaker for who knows how long. We shall see. But Mike Johnson is the new speaker now. So that changed a lot of things in this whole trajectory of the Farm Bill. COVID didn't help us any. It delayed things a lot. But the mess in the House has really affected things, especially. So there's the Farm Bill. We punted that too until September 30, 2024, because the last Farm Bill that we were operating under, the 2018 Farm Bill, expired September 30th of 2023. So it expired. They kicked the can down the road a ways, you know, and then when Mike Johnson came in as speaker, it wasn't too many days after that he negotiated the extension of the current Farm Bill into 2024. So we've got until September 30, 2024. We're still operating under the 2018 Farm Bill.
So tell them what happens if they let it expire.
So what happens if they let it expire is we revert back to the original Farm Bill of 1935, or is it 40?
33.
33. Well, no, because that one was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court.
Figure that out.
Yeah, so I think it's 38. I think it's that Farm Bill, which actually is great because parity pricing back then was wonderful. So it would drive up prices for all those commodities and for dairy farmers and all that. It'd be a wonderful thing, but it wouldn't include food stamps or SNAP. It wouldn't include a lot of the programs that we operate under right now.
You wouldn't even have soybeans, they didn't have soybeans.
Yeah, we didn't have soybeans then. So, you know, we don't want that to happen. So then we also have this looming threat of the government shutdown, which within the next few weeks, they've got to get that figured out. Of course, they went back here last week. Whether they're gonna punt on that or not, we don't know. So there's a lot of things in play here. But what it really means is, this is from 2012, we had a Farm Bill Now rally on the Capitol lawn. Well, now it's Farm Bill Later. And, you know, there's so many different things, and Don alluded to this in his comments earlier. The election that we're gonna have here in November plays a big role in this. A big piece of legislation like the Farm Bill could easily get mired in the presidential politics. That's the last thing we want. And why? Because we strive for it to be bipartisan. We strive for it to be probably the most bipartisan piece of legislation that we have in this country. And the longer we let it move into 2024, the harder it's gonna be for us to keep it bipartisan. When we were in DC back in September for our fly-in, one of the staffers for Senator Marshall said this, and I truly believe what he said, that if we don't get a farm bill passed in the first quarter of 2024, so by April 1, if we don't get a farm bill passed by then, 9 times out of 10, we're not gonna get one passed in 2024. What they'll do is they'll do another extension at some point, before September 30th, obviously. But of course, they'll figure out, we'll know in November where things end up. But 9 times out of 10, it's gonna get kicked into 2025 if we don't pass a farm bill by April 1. And as I said earlier, we haven't passed one on time since 2002, so we've been down this road before. We're good at it. We're good at punting. We're good at kicking the can down the road. Or they are, I should say. So what can we do? What can you all do? Because obviously we have a little more time now to work with and to work on this farm bill. This is our delegation that went out to DC for our fly-in a year ago. So there are some opportunities through National Farmers Union. We have that fly-in to DC, calls to action. We have our grassroots policy process, and you can also share ideas and views with your federal legislators. So our fly-in is held mid-September every year out in DC. We usually take a handful of members. This is at USDA. We always have a day at USDA, spend about 4 hours there. This is our national president, Rob LaRue. Here's a good friend of ours, Zach Ducheneau, who's the administrator of the Farm Service Agency, and some other USDA staffers there. We get to hear from the top individuals at USDA. Right here, Deputy Secretary Xochitl Torres Small of New Mexico. She's brand new in that position. She's a friend of mine. She used to be a congresswoman from New Mexico. She's the number 2 at USDA now, and then there's Tom Vilsack, the secretary. We have a very good relationship with this administration, a very good relationship. And then we have meetings with our delegation. So this is us meeting with Senator Moran's staff. One thing you should note, I know I mentioned earlier that we've got our 2 from the House and our senator, but Jerry Moran he's on he's on the Senate Ag Appropriations Committee. That's where all the money is for all these programs. So having a good relationship with him and having his ear and the ear of his staff is really important too, because that's where the money comes from to fund these important programs in the Farm Bill.
So point Jill out, Jill.
Oh yeah, Jill Elmers. She's a local here, farmer, Moon on the Meadow, is that right? Yeah. And on our board. There we are with Jake LaTurner and Jerry Moran meeting, mainly just for photos. And then Tracy Mann and Sharice David. So it's important for us to have those meetings and have those discussions and get to know them and their staff. So and then one big part of the fly-in is we always get an opportunity, at least with this administration, to go to the White House and talk with high-level cabinet folks there and folks within the White House itself. So this is some of our members from across the country that got a chance to do that. A little bit about our policy process. It truly is a grassroots process, and I invite you to go and look at our website and learn more about who we are and what we do. But it truly guides us as an organization, and it comes from our membership. It starts at that local level and it works its way up. It's a wonderful, very small d democratic process. So I invite you to look at that. We do that every year. As I said, it starts here and then it works its way up. So the locals, the county, the state, and then here in a few months in March, we're going to be out in Arizona for our national convention, where all of the states and Farmers Union come together. They bring their policy, and we have this 2-day discussion on policy on that national level. So these are just some of the highlights from our 2024 policy. We want to add publicly subsidized crop insurance for specialty food crops. We reiterated our support for the Rochdale Cooperative Principles, one member, one vote. We're opposing the use of a proportional voting system or voting power based on members' use of cooperative or on the amount of stock ownership, supporting adequate access to water resources for all Kansans. That's huge, given the challenges we're seeing. You look down at Caney right now, operating on very limited resources, but then you also look at the Ogallala and what's happening there. And then supporting right to repair legislation for ag equipment on the state and federal levels. Then we get into our special orders of business, and these are important. These are the cream that rises to the top, the most important issues for our organization for the coming year. These are the ones that we passed this year. Support for Kansas County Health Departments. Support for Medicaid expansion. We've had this in our policy for years, but we wanted to bring it up to the top, highlight it. Discontinuation of the Medicare Advantage program. I'll bet there's a few of you that would like to see that go away, right? Our priorities for the next farm bill, and then our support for the United States Postal Service, and I'll note that we have a clause or a statement in there that asks, that demands the removal of Louis DeJoy as Postmaster General, so I really like that. So what are our farm bill priorities? Well, on the national level, these were the ones that were identified at our convention a year ago in March. Address competition issues, and I'm not talking about KU versus K-State. I'm talking about competition and concentration in agriculture. The fact that there are only 4 meat packers in this country, the fact that there are only 3 or 4 equipment manufacturers in this country, the fact that there are only a handful of seed and chemical and fertilizer companies in this country. Farm programs, of course, dairy, climate, conservation, and energy, but then all of these as well. And really, we kind of flipped this on its head at Kansas. While these are important, yes, we decided that these were probably even more important, if not as important as those others. So talking about nutrition and research and rural development, but focusing specifically on beginning, veteran, and socially disadvantaged farmers, staffing at USDA, and also farm stress. I'm proud to say that in the 2018 Farm Bill, I worked very closely, at the time I was working in Wisconsin, with Senator Tammy Baldwin, who's on the Ag Appropriations Committee. And we were on a phone call with her and her staff, and there's a program in the Farm Bill that's called the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network, FIRSAN. And at the time, they were only gonna fund that at about $2 million a year. So $20 million over the 5-year period of the Farm Bill. We sat there and we told her, we need more money. We need $10 million a year for this program. It needs to be $50 million. She made it happen. So now we have that $50 million a year for programs that address farm stress. And
Senator Moran was a part of that.
Jerry Moran was a big part of that too. And that was huge. You know, getting that bipartisan effort to make sure that happens, because it affects everybody. Farm stress is real, it's happening, and we're hoping we can get some more money into that program for this next farm bill as well. That's just another version of our priorities on the national level. But I want to note that you hear a lot about the people that are upset with our government right now, and maybe some are rightfully so upset. But when Sandra Day O'Connor passed away here about a month ago, I started listening to her biography that was written about her. You know, she focused a lot on civics and civic education and engagement in her retirement. And I think this quote is very fitting. You have citizens who don't understand how government works. Number one, they don't get it because they've never been taught what civics is all about. They've never been educated and engaged. And they've kind of soured on it, obviously. All they do is criticize. They have no idea that they can make things happen. Farmers Union is an organization that helps to make things happen, especially when it comes to something like the Farm Bill. So we strive to do that at that local level too. We strive to do that here on the state level. Tomorrow, day one of the Kansas legislative session, we'll have our lobbyists down there watching and pushing our priorities, in Topeka as well. So, this is how I wanna end, but happy to take questions.
Yeah, I guess I have one comment I'd like to make on is the fact that Nick mentioned earlier that the Farm Bill is evolutionary, and that's right, that's what it is. But it's my opinion that we as a society don't have time to be evolutionary. I mean, we could have a farm bill that rather than subsidizing production of bushels, would be subsidizing carbon sequestration. What do we can't even come to a consensus on the action steps we have to do. But if we could, I mean, the American farmer is where the carbon sink is, so the farm bill could actually be a valuable tool in addressing climate change. But we don't really have 5 years to wait till the next farm bill. And so, you know, what could happen dramatically to make a difference? And so, that's my frustration.
And as I said earlier, there are hundreds and hundreds of organizations wanting their piece of that big pie, you know? And it all comes down to money at the end of the day, a lot of the lobbying efforts that take place. We don't have a lot of money at Farmers Union. NSAC doesn't have a lot of money to be thrown around, you know? Sierra Club, you name it. But there's entities that do, and that's what drives the policy. So we've gotta tackle that issue as well, among other things.